Thank you. Welcome to this research and practice event held on the 6th of October 2021. I'm Jacqueline Baker, your host. Today's speaker is Rob Hall, who is joining us from Sydney. Now, interestingly, Rob, who is an environmental psychologist, began his career as an electrical engineer with BHP. However, he became more interested in psychology than steel making. I don't see the connection at all yet, but hopefully you'll fill us in. He completed a PhD researching the way decisions are made and then joined the staff at Macquarie University. He taught social research methods and subsequently taught them to postgraduate students in Sydney, Sydney University, University of New South Wales, Guangzhou, Hong Kong, Italy, Zurich, and the USA. Rob became interested in environmental psychology and began consulting on applied projects. During his consulting career, he discovered why 2 out of 3 toilets had stopped working on some Qantas 747s landing in Heathrow, and why some meteorologists at Bureau of Meteorology saw lows while others saw highs. And I've heard many other stories that has me in fits of laughter. So I'm sure Rob will be sharing some of them today. He's going to talk today mainly about collaborating with architects and designers and some psychological perspectives that he hopes will be useful for us all. So the title of Rob's presentation is Architecture Through the Eyes of a Psychologist. After the presentation, you'll have the opportunity to ask Rob questions about his work. So over to you, Rob.
Oh, look, thanks, Jacqueline. And it's great to be here. I was lucky enough to be introduced by Jacqueline to this seminar series as recently as last one. And I enjoyed it very much. And then I paid the price of being a newbie when she said, you're next. So here I am. Jacqueline said I'm an environmental psychologist, and I really need to say that most psychologists don't know what an environmental psychologist is. And I've been from time to time asked whether I give counselling to distressed shrubs who are having mental health issues or something like that. But that's not the case. An environmental psychologist is interested in the way people, you and I, interact with our physical environment. And so we try and know how people interpret, how they use, how they see, generally interacting with their physical environment. And to do that successfully, we need a bit of a mental model of how people work. Now, I have to say at the outset, I've worked with designers and architects who have a better mental model of how people work than some of the psychologists I know. I also know some psychologists who are pretty good with coloured pencils, and so that evens things up a bit. The fact that you're here at this session suggests to me that whatever discipline or design or psychology you're in, you've got a pretty good mental model. And so in a sense, I'm talking to you as the converted, and it runs the risk that at the end you say, well, yeah, I know all that. Hopefully you don't know it all, so I've got something to say. And what I'm going to do is go through some slides, if that's okay. So, Jacqueline, may I share my screen?
We should be able to just share, Rob.
Yep, there I am. Can you, okay, see that?
Yep.
All right. What I'm just wanting to do, you'll just have to ignore the bits down the side. When the invitation came out, it had the diagram, my first version of the diagram with worlds colliding, and that, I'm afraid, made it seem a bit like a B-grade science fiction film that I was going to be presenting. What I'm interested in is the way our worlds are evolving. And so psychs like me and designers like many of you are beginning to collaborate and have a shared model of the way people work and have ideas about this people and environment interaction. What I want to do in this session is really, sorry, I have done exactly the wrong thing there. I didn't press play, my apologies. There's nothing worse than an inept presenter. So I'm scoring high on that at the moment. What I'd like to do is really, in this session, quickly speak about three things. The first is the impact of a fountain, and that's going to explain how I got into environmental psychology. Then I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the projects, or more correctly, the way people I've collaborated with have trained me to do what I do. It's a bit of a personal history, and in that sense, it's quite self-indulgent, but and I'm going to try and be the hero of the entire narrative. But the reality is that I've had the good fortune to work with extremely clever and smart people, architects, psychologists, designers, and they've managed to fill my intellectual backpack with some really good ideas. So most of what I'm going to be presenting, I've learned from other people. And I'm going to finish up with a third bit where hopefully I give you some useful bits that you might think, oh yeah, that's an interesting idea. So let's start with this issue of the fountain. When I had graduated in psychology, I'd done the traditional kind of training, and I was looking around for something to do, and I was reading a magazine article in which it described a large development was taking place in Chicago, tower building, and the multi-billionaire who was paying for this thing wanted a plaza, a piazza, a thing in the front, and it would have a restaurant and coffee shops and all that sort of stuff. But the brief for the architect included the fact that he always wanted people hanging around there. And the architect had come up with a really good solution, and it was probably early in the generation of programmed fountains, because he or she had designed this programmed fountain with stepping stones in it. And if you looked at the program for long enough, you realized there were periods where you could actually run through it without getting wet. And the architect had worked out that there'd always be some idiot who'd give it a go, and so it would entertain people and make them sit there. I thought this was a really interesting thing, and the bit that struck me most forcefully was, how come this architect's doing this stuff? How come this person has such a good understanding of human behavior? Why don't I ever read this stuff from psychologists? Well, I had the good fortune to meet another psychologist and an architect who was at the Sydney University, Associate Professor Ross Thorne, who's no longer there. And we used to talk about this sort of stuff. And Ross had rooms at Sydney University. He ducked out of the department. He found an empty space, splendid, great rooms, that were totally unoccupied, but were close to the coffee shop and the bar, and decided that they would be his studio. And so we used to sit in this great space talking about this sort of stuff. And we decided that we'd be the architectural psychology research unit. Now, just imagine three people sitting there thinking, let's create this thing called the Architectural Psychology Research Unit. And I have to say, because you can see the color of my beard and the fact that I'm just about at the stage where I know every hair by name, I've been around for a while. So this was in the early 70s. And we put a sign on the door and we started thinking about environmental psychology, or then architectural psychology. We were very thrilled the next year when the university calendar came out and we found that it was listed as a feature of the university. One of the things we thought we could do was start to bring psychology into the world of architecture. And we put on a short course in architectural psychology. Now, if you can see this closely on your screen, you'll see that all of the topics were what I'd call traditional laboratory psychology. How eyes work, how ears work, how the senses work. Interestingly,
Hey, Rob.
Yes.
We're still on the first slide. Have you moved? Have you moved
yes,
past?
I have.
Okay.
Yes, I have.
Then maybe use the navigation.
Resume. Clicking resume share. What are you seeing at the moment?
We're just seeing that first slide.
Okay.
So I'm wondering if you just clicked through them using the left navigation, the slides on the left, maybe.
Yeah, okay. Well, let me try doing that. I'll drop out of this.
Yep.
Now, this is going to be really tricky because these things are meant to appear. So I'll pull the slide apart so you can see them. This is my patented animation. This course that we had was very traditional laboratory psychology, and there was a great gap between that and anything that was useful for architects. And so we were terribly pleased with it at the time, but we could sense this gap, that what was coming out of psychology wasn't very applicable and useful. We decided to start doing some research, and we said, okay, what do people notice when they look at designed spaces? And we decided that for the sake of this study, the design spaces we could look at were lift foyers in large office buildings. We chose lift foyers because they're all relatively small and we could talk to people about them in our study. And we published this article called Multidimensional Scaling Analysis of Interior Design Spaces, which is a real crowd puller, you can tell. The other thing you'll notice about the diagram is that this was before the journals could accept photographs, and so our slides had to be drawn in black and white. So right about 1980, sorry, I'll move this over so we see that. Wiley's decided to publish a 2-volume handbook of environmental psychology, and Ross and I were invited to write the chapter on Australia. I think the thing I'm most proud of in that article was that we acknowledged and wrote about the environmental psychology of Indigenous people. So we were giving them a bit of airtime. The thing that I'm very embarrassed about is that we didn't actually involve discussion with any Indigenous people. And I feel bad about that because we were working from secondary sources, but I'm glad that we wrote about it. When I started consulting, a lot of the consulting work was to do with why things didn't work. And so, first of all, we found ourselves talking to organizations who thought about failures in terms of bad users. And this is in the Sydney Ferry terminal, and the ferry people were very proud of two things. On the left side, this ticket dispenser, and here the new ways to go through and deposit your ticket. The ticket dispenser was a very odd design, and it had all of the possible ferry wharves and destinations down here. And so you can see this person looking down to work out which button to press to get their ticket. The tricky thing for them was that where you put your money in was up the top here. And so people spent a lot of time fruitlessly trying to work out how to get a ferry trip. Similarly, the design of the turnstiles on this side was just right for giving people the cue to go through the turnstile next to the one in which they'd paid. So they'd drop their coin in, stride confidently forward and crash into the turnstile, so that in fact, they had to employ staff to stand there and make sure people went up the same turnstile. And so we were working on how this might be redesigned in the context of, aren't the people stupid, the users? Then we got to do a project at Sydney Airport, which was called the Total Journey Experience. And what we were briefed to do was assist the designers in helping them modify the airport so that the journey from the car park to the aircraft was as smooth as possible. But the model that tended to be given to us all the time was about inadequate users. And one of the things that we did to approach this research was to collaborate with one of the organizations for people with disabilities, particularly wheelchairs. And you can see the kinds of difficulties those people faced. So the person on the left with the blue shirt is carrying, as we asked, a package and comes across from the car park and has to get up here and through this gate. Similarly, the telephones are too high, the mirrors in the toilets, if you were in a wheelchair, you could only see about the top of your head. And so, as I was saying, we were doing all these projects where the client perspective was in part one of the user was at full. Coming forward in this thread, we began to find situations where designs were being produced, but the model of the person was just a single person, or at most two. Now, this is the Tom Roberts painting of the opening of the first Parliament when we had federation. And as you probably know, all of the people in the painting are real people. And what Tom Roberts did was represent them so they were recognizable. The National Gallery decided that people would be really interested in knowing who these people were. And so they very thoughtfully fixed two iPads here with a bench seat. Now, when you think about it, if you wanted to see who these people were, you might use this iPad, you in fact might sit on the seat. And there's a lot of people to check through on your iPad. Now, the reality is that normally the crowd in here was about 30 or 40 people. So the first two in grabbed the iPads and the rest standed around snarling, waiting for them to stop. And so this was an example of a situation where the designing didn't have a model of what it would be like at the time. And it's looking at these kinds of cases that I think has helped me and my colleagues develop some models that we think might be useful. I'm going to go very quickly to get through to the bits and pieces that I'm hoping might be useful at the end that I'm working towards. But just another couple of kinds of examples. Newcastle, New South Wales Council has 8,000 blocks of pavement to manage. So the engineers manage this. And they have to spend their money fixing up the pavement, but they also have to account to the councillors, in effect, and the mayor, who are really not by and large very technical. And so they asked whether we could come up with a system to capture how people, the users, perceive the quality of roads, and whether it wasn't possible to have a way of communicating what people are seeing to the council. And so very quickly, we went round with the engineers and we collected a sample of kinds of roads as measured by their technical machines that go around and measure. And then we used Photoshop to reduce the background and focus on the road. And then we gave people a series of roads and got them to make judgments about how good they look. And we asked them some other things too, like how noisy do they think they'd be to drive on, or how bumpy, and so on. And this began to fall into the category of what became called perceived environmental quality indices, PEQIs. This bar chart here has the blue, which is the assessment of these 8,000 blocks made by the machine that goes ping, that drives around like a big truck. And the green is the pattern of responses from people looking at our photographs of the samples. And the story is that people are pretty darn good. You and I know when we're looking at a good road, and we say it's looking like a good road. And the output from this that was very helpful was that the engineers were able, in their reporting to council, to show pictures of roads and say, we've shifted 10% of our blocks into this next good category. And so it was a method of communicating. We then did some work on in the area of social impact and community development, and worked with developers on looking at, in this case, social equity, how the spaces might be used so that all the both visitors and residents had a fair crack of it. And then here at Penrith Lakes in Sydney, how they might go about setting out developing community. Now, just a reminder that the reason I'm going through this is to give a sense of the kinds of experiences that have led to the model that I'd like to share with you in a second. And I'm going to jump. No, I'm not. I just like those little people. I won't jump that. I now want to give you some perspectives on people that have come out of this whole thing. And the first is about whether we think of people as variable or stable. And I'm focusing here on the fact that if you're designing air conditioning, when I talk to air conditioning engineers, their goal is to achieve stability. They'd like to be able to set the airflow, the temperature, and the humidity so it's just at a level that's acceptable and stays there. What we know, however, is that people are change detectors. Your nervous system and mine is actually happiest and optimized for detecting change. If you don't have change stimulating the nervous system, you end up in the workplace with what I'd be calling induced workplace jet lag. And if you've worked in an office where the conditions are very steady, you've probably had that experience of thinking, oh, I'm half asleep. And the relevance of this comes in this example, where in Singapore, the geological structure is such that in parts of the island, it's so solid that you can easily go down, you could produce levels of buildings that go down 10 floors. And the question was, what would you have to do, apart from all the technical issues, what would you have to do to make those places usable and appealing to people who don't have to go down there? We're not talking about miners and people whose job is going down. And the question arose because in a small place like Singapore, the government wanted to explore putting as much as possible underground to allow for a green, literally green environment maximized above ground. Now, if you take that issue of nervous system stability and you've built that into your model of people, then the question becomes, what should I do? How should we texture things? How should we keep people stimulated if they're going 10 floors down? So part of the mental model that I tend to carry around with me is this sense of variability and the need to keep people stimulated, and that a steady state is often not the best. Jumping to another kind of question. Now, I should say that despite what I've been showing you, a lot of our work involves third places. That is, things like libraries and museums and art galleries and so on, where it's discretionary whether you go there or not. And the question is, what's the main reason, or the question that's often asked is, what's the main reason people go to the art gallery? What's the main reason they go to the museum? What's the main reason they go to a park? Well, the first thing I'd like to say is that in this little list, I've got various kinds of reasons we do anything in terms of going out. And one is to return richer, and I don't mean with money. I mean, all of the ways we can come back richer. So you might go to the museum because you want to come back with new ideas or have seen something. There's that sense of, that's why I go to these places. But you might also go there as part of bonding. Now, this is where these two things come together. If you take a museum or an art gallery or a park, it's very rare for people to go by themselves, excluding joggers and dog walkers. But in fact, about the only place where the majority of people who go have come by themselves in discretionary spaces is libraries. Almost everywhere else, people go in a group. And when you've got a group and you're making a decision, usually somebody is the social secretary. And the value, the way they decide whether something's been good is whether the others say that was great, we've had a good time. And if you've got kids and you go somewhere, you know you don't want to be driving home with some sullen kid in the back saying, that sucked. And so the wrong question is, what's the main reason people go somewhere? The right question, I think, is more like the graphic equalizer you see on sound systems. And that's why this diagram's here. That we're dealing with a package of reasons that people go. And the designs need to meet those profiles of needs. That leads me to another idea that we've found very helpful in predicting where people will go, and that's the idea of negotiable places. Coming down this line of why do people go somewhere and the fact that they go with mixed motives, you've probably been in a conversation yourself that's a bit like, and this is Sydney-centric, let's go to the zoo. The kids will like to go to the zoo. But let's say one of the adults in the household doesn't want to go to the zoo. They don't want to walk around and see animals. They would like to go to an art gallery. But the others don't want to go to the art gallery, and the kids don't want to go to the art gallery. So they go, say, to a place like Darling Harbour because it's negotiable. Everybody gets a bit of satisfaction. And so this part of the model, the why, we've found very helpful. I'd now like to jump to another concept, which is, I'm going to cover that up a bit for the moment. This is about the goals and expectations that people have when they're going somewhere and interacting with the environment. And that's the notion of scripts, or it's the goal or the expectation, it's the thing you want to achieve. And this image here, to illustrate what I'd call a mismatch, is the Federation Museum in Corowa. Now, some of you might have been to the Federation Museum, and Corowa is a small town on the border between New South Wales and Victoria. But it punches above its weight in importance because it was there. Let me visualize this. There's the river, there's a bridge. There are people living, raising sheep or cattle and what on either side. And Auntie Gladys lives here and Mum lives there. And so going back and forth over the bridge. But in going over the bridge, you're going from New South Wales to Victoria. What happened prior to Federation was that there were different tax structures. And so if you said, I'm going to visit Auntie Glad and we'll take a leg of lamb with us, she'd like to cook that. As you went over the bridge, they'd say, tax on the leg of lamb is. And people got so fed up with that that it became the trigger point for Federation and a shared tax system. So the reason I've given you all that, imagine you've arrived in Corowa and you think, I'll go and see this Federation Museum because I've heard it's really important historically or whatever. You walk through the door and that's what you're greeted by. Now, this is a whole lot of fascinating stuff. But the other thing about this stuff is it extends all the way down the long building. And when you get to the end of the building, behind the little curtain is the Federation stuff. And so the promise is you're going to see about these things. Instead, you see a whole lot of this stuff. Now, I have to say that the good people who look after the museum, part of their problem is what I'd call the tyranny of stuff. In other words, all the locals keep donating stuff. And because it's a small area, you can't throw anything out because I think Aunt Gladys would be terribly distressed, or Uncle Bill. So the point of this, that we really need to think that our users or the people who are going to do things are coming with scripts and things they want to achieve. I'm almost at the end of these things, and there are two more. And the first is the notion of the choreography of a visit. When you're thinking about going to a zoo or a museum or a cafe or a bar or an airport or a hospital, that the visit is not a unit thing like something in a nutshell. It's a set of dance steps, as it were. People expect that they're going to do this many activities, and then they'll be doing this, and then they'll be doing that. And the way we understand an experience depends on things like the emotion. And that affects the choreography of the visit. This is obviously a view at an airport. And airports and hospitals are particular cases that tend to be awash with emotion. And when we're awash with emotion, things happen like we tend to get tunnel vision and we don't see things. and we're anxious. And so in an exercise we were doing with an airport on one occasion, the key question for us was, what's the inter-queue distance? In other words, how far apart or how close together, looked at the other way, do we need to put wayfinding things to deal with the fact that people will be very anxious and tend not to see stuff? And if they don't get a cue that they're going in the right direction to the right gate often enough, it's panicking. Related to that is the other notion that groups of people tend to trump signs. What I mean by that is, if you go into, say, a large open area that might be, and I'm thinking, as I do this, of what was the Sydney Water Office, where people would go to pay bills. And it was the ground level floor, and you'd go in and there was a huge counter. And there were different activities at each counter, and paying your bill might be just there. And way up high, because the ceiling height was terrific, there were signs that told you what was happening underneath at the counter, like pay your bills over there. But people would be going everywhere. And what was obvious was that if there was a knot of people at a counter checking something like drainage specifications, people wanting to pay a bill would go over and stand with them because, well, obviously everyone must have been there to pay bills. My point is that we need to account in laying out the design of things and the signage for the fact that, A, what's the choreography in the situation? And B, people mightn't see or interpret the sign. They might just look for where other people are. And the last thing I want to bring up is a tool, I suppose, a way of looking at things that we've found very useful. And again, as I said at the beginning, because you're here, and thank you for being here, you probably know all this anyway. And I'm talking to the converted. You say, well, you know, I knew that. But it's interesting how many people don't know it when you get out to talk to clients. Now, for us, a behavior setting is a mixture of the physical infrastructure, the stuff the designer is producing and the builder or the developer is producing, combined with the formal rules for using it and the informal rules. And the easiest way I can find to explain this is just to say that it's hard to play poker in a cinema. Because if you think about trying to play poker in a cinema, first of all, let's say there are 4 of you want to play poker. The seats all face the same way. Now, this is a trivial and silly example, but it makes the point. The seats all face the same way. They're the infrastructure. So 2 people have to turn around and lean on the seat to play with the people behind them. One of the formal rules of a cinema is they put the lights up. So clearly you can't be playing poker in the dark. And an informal rule of the cinema is that everyone else goes shh as you try to play. And so that combination of things is what is termed a behavior setting. And what's really useful about that as a perspective to look at a place is it takes your mind off just the infrastructure. It takes your mind off the aspirational idea of, oh yeah, well, I'll design it this way and people will. Well, often people won't. And so having an idea of not only the physical shape of the thing, but what are the formal rules and how people are going to respond to them? And what are the informal rules? How do people, for example, choose to colonize areas in a park. One of the obvious things that we've observed is that when a place has very few behavior settings, when it's not textured, and I'm talking now about a discretionary place like a park, when it's basically just one big behavior setting, it's the same as when people say there's nothing to do there. And the very best designs, we've seen the very clever designs, have a matrix of behavior settings so that people can act out the scripts they want to act out. And everybody in the group ends up thinking they've achieved something. And it's a great visit. Look, thank you for, I'm sorry that the slides were so klutzy and that I've had to animate them live for you, but thank you for listening.
Sorry, I was muted. Thanks very much, Rob. Dara, you had a comment. Would you like to elaborate on Gibson's theories of affordance? Not sure many people would be familiar with them. You there, Dara? No, he's, yep, there he is.
Sorry, yes, yeah, I beg your pardon.
So you might be on site somewhere, but then I thought, no, you shouldn't be.
No, that's fine. Excuse me, I'm actually, yeah, I'm just curious, and thanks for the talk there, Rob. I'm just curious about the idea. I've come across it quite a while ago, this Gibson's psychologist who wrote about architectural space, or any space really, in the environment and how it affords, back to your idea of behavior settings. And quite often, part of the problem for us as architects is that while we might be familiar with environmental psychology, and one of the challenges of psychology is it might identify the what and the why of things, it doesn't really often help with the how. Like, how do we respond? How do we design? What does our design need to do? Because quite often there's not enough detailed research to be able to help with the how. And we're all kind of familiar with that problem. But one of the things I always found intriguing from back in the way into the 70s was a paper written by Gibson who talked about affordances. Now, unfortunately, I've never come across any further work on that from him or from anybody else. But the idea, which fits in with your notion of behavior settings, that certain things afford certain behaviors and that we respond to them. And so I guess I was wondering if there's any contemporary research that's being done in that kind of area, particularly empirical research where people might be actually studying these sorts of affordances. That's basically my question to you.
Well, the first thing I'd say is yes. As I said at the beginning, most of the stuff I've presented, I've stolen from other people. So Gibson was lurking in there as well. But yes, and I hear your point that unfortunately there's often not a lot of information to help you as a designer about how people will respond. Part of my interest, I think, is in helping change that, working towards encouraging other psychologists to get involved. And yes, I think there's quite a lot of current empirical research that I could point you to, which carries on with looking at the affordance issue.
Okay, thanks for that. Look, be interested in hearing a bit more about that if Jacqueline wants to maybe put us in touch.
Absolutely, happy to do that.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm thrilled to have somebody who's interested. That's great. Thank you.
Sure. Fiona, do you have a question you'd like to answer, ask?
Hi. Actually, I don't have a question, but I just wanted to let Dara know that my PhD research focused on affordances in the context of learning environments. And so I'm happy to share some of my recent papers around that, if of interest.
Yeah, thanks, Fiona. That would be of interest, definitely.
Great.
Can you see those links in the chat, Dara?
I can,
Fiona sent? Yep. Okay.
I'm just opening it up right now. Okay, thank you for that.
And Rebecca, you say that you actually cite Gibson quite a bit in your papers?
Yeah, sorry, I was going to say, I think Dara just accidentally hit on like one of our favourite theorists, to be fair. I had a question though, and this idea about variability for human stimulation, Rob, is there some published research on that? And the reason I ask is that we do a lot of work in palliative care, and we're constantly told by physicians that people at the end of their life want fresh air, and yet it's a constant battle to get the hospitals to do it. And I know there's a bunch of difficulty around that, but there doesn't seem to be any research that I've found that actually kind of puts any science behind people appreciating that variability.
I think one place you can look is, sorry, I'm just checking I wasn't on mute. There's a guy called David Wyon, W-Y-O-N, and he floats around Scandinavia and other places. But he's an example of a person who's been doing a whole lot of research over years on preferences for kind of air and airflow and humidity and movement and so on. So I think that would be a good starting place that might help.
Great, thank you. I'll write him down.
Yeah, I mean, I could also point you to some work that's been done by Esther Sternberg. Have you come across Esther Sternberg?
I've read her book, the one that she published a while back on healing spaces, which seemed pretty lightweight, but has she done some stuff since then? I mean, I don't mean lightweight, but very general in terms of it didn't get into much detail.
Well, I was thinking about the work they're doing at the university and hospital where she's based, and the name eludes me at the moment.
Okay, I'll have a look, thank you. It might have been that I haven't kept up with her recent stuff.
Okay.
There's another comment that I can't actually read your name, but I think someone else is saying that they cite Gibson. I think, is that in urban design?
Yeah, hi. It's Emil.
Hi, Emil.
Yeah, it is in urban. We used a lot of his theories, obviously specifically to in an urban context, but we did it through case studies through Perth. And one, interestingly, we looked at sort of the maneuvers of parkour and skateboarding and how they interpreted the built environment, and looked to kind of the mechanics of those maneuvers as a way of, bringing in and thinking about different elements of design for activation through those activities. So I'm happy to put a link to it in the thread here, but yeah, affordance is definitely something that we consider a fair bit in practice as well.
Well, as I said, I think that the fact that you're attending groups like this is probably a bit of a filter for people who are very thoroughly versed in these kinds of issues. And so I'm not surprised to find that you're all Gibson fans. Well, you're some Gibson fans anyway.
Are there any other questions or comments? Oh, here we go. Emma Wetting-Steele.
It's not my project, so I can't really comment on it too much, but it's just another project that I know that someone else has done recently that uses affordance theory quite a lot. It's pretty interesting. But thank you, Rob. That was a really interesting talk.
Oh, thank you.
So what's this project, Emma?
This is someone else from Curtin University. It's how space affects social value judgments at zero acquaintance, and like in public spaces especially. He looks at symbolic interactionism and affordance theory, I think, are the main two theories.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And Emil, you've put up a paper there. Could you tell, is this the paper you were talking about?
Yeah, that's the paper we're talking about. So there is that. After doing a number of these things, looking at different aspects of affordance, there was even quite a number of, what would you call them, signature lecture series that were presented through Curtin, predominantly to about second years in architecture around, looking at a contrast between different spaces and how affordance thinking can enrich the different, the number of different activities that could occur in a space, that it doesn't just necessarily happen by accident. It's actually designed in and thought about. So, just to bring that to front of mind when they're looking to assess a space and why it feels the way it does and why it's successful and why people want to be there and why different types of groups and with different abilities are able to kind of inhabit the same space.
I'm really interested generally, since there are a number of people who have already brought up this whole idea of affordances. I'm interested in how you experience that when you're designing. I mean, if you know what I mean. How do you put it into practice? How do you actually do it?
Well, that's certainly from our perspective. We reverse engineered the observational analysis of the parkour and the skateboarding and how the other users were using the space. But more recently, I've been speaking to Dr. Chris Quay from ECU, and he writes and does a lot of research on service design. And just in that service design thinking, you were talking about it earlier in your presentation, Rob, about thinking with the ticket booth, thinking the process and how one would use that space and how it would make sense. So the thinking for us at least has become a lot richer, having that sort of service design experiential, the whole journey through type of thinking as a way of reverse engineering and unpacking what it would take to actually invoke those types of experiences to make sure there's some sort of a linear thread throughout it.
Yeah.
Thanks, Emil. Dara has another question.
I think it was just in response to Rob's question, and it's kind of a reasonably current conversation that's popping up in various different forums about the way architecture is taught. Studio-based design thinking, where you get basically 20-odd 18-year-olds sitting in a room discussing how things work and what impact they might have, or if they're lucky, quite a lot of schools don't even get into that. And there was a trend towards the end of the 20th into the 21st century after postmodernism to move away from the human experience of space. And since sustainability has reemerged, social sustainability and environmental experience has come back again, and environmental psychology as a concern to architects, I think, over the last 10 years or so. And I know for myself, about 15, 20 years ago, I started thinking my education was defective because we never really spoke about these things when I back way in the day. And so I've been kind of going about that for the last 20 years, trying to improve on that experience. But there's a school of thought which saying, oh, well, studios shouldn't be as important, but I would disagree. I think we need to think differently about how we deliver studios and have our students thinking from day one that they need to gather data, they need to observe, that every project they ever do for the rest of their careers could involve a small amount of coordinated research with other practices in order to build our knowledge base about these things. Because quite often, whether it's education or health, although health is probably more advanced, our data is very limited. Yeah, well, there's a lot of theory, particularly education. If you've been any interest in education research over the last 20, for hundreds of years, but the last 20 to 30 years, it's really is lacking in data and in post-occupancy analysis. And that's the big problem in architecture, is that nobody pays us and we don't have enough funds, although there's a huge interest in it, to actually go and do the post-occupancy analysis. And you get very large clients, people I'm sure you've worked for, Rob, and they'll come to you and going, you know, how do we make this work? We're spending billions of dollars on this new retail precinct. How does it work? And there's really not the data to reach. There's no long-term research. There are short theoretical projects and there are short research projects, but the culture of research in architectural practice doesn't yet still embrace this idea as it being essential to do post-occupancy. It's still only desirable. About 5 years ago, we did a global survey through ArcDaily, and we got about nearly 500 respondents from different practices about the nature of their post-occupancy analysis. And we found that less than 5% did any formal post-occupancy. Only 10 to 15 ever even actually went back into their buildings to see how they worked. Less than 5%, and of those 5%, that 5% was primarily healthcare projects based in the US because they had to. Here, and so I could go on and on, but post-occupancy analysis is basically, if we can get that embedded as part of architectural practice, even through a statutory mechanism where clients are required to do it, and that in itself is complex, particularly with public projects. But without that coordinated, we're still sitting in a world of theory. I think, sorry, I can't remember your name, who brought up the idea of palliative care and the introduction of fresh air and anecdotal information coming from Rebecca. Sorry, Rebecca. Usually takes a few meetings for me to get a name. But the idea of, I agree, it's totally a few years back, we looked into palliative care research, and I was astonished to think about how much aged care research there is, how much healthcare, but nobody asks dying people what they want. They don't think it's important or something. I'm not sure why, but all we have is anecdotal information from practitioners. And that's astonishing to me. And I'm sure, Rob, you probably feel similarly that, you know, why is it that this isn't isn't a huge issue? But I am put in mind of sustainability 20 years ago. People were going, why isn't this a huge issue? And now it is. But it should have been 20 years ago, and it wasn't in Australia or anywhere really in the world. So I think this sort of thinking, environmental psychology's time will come. We now have the tools to make it possible to study in detail. But it does take a lot of advocacy from people like yourselves and other members of this group to make it something that's part of day-to-day practice. Sorry, that's a bit of a rant, but it's something I feel very passionate about.
Well, I realize that it's time to finish, but I'd just like to add to that one of the reasons that Environmetrics, my business, is labeled a social and market research company is that the best way for us to get involved in environmental psychology with clients is to get involved in what they see as their business cases, and they understand market research. If you say I'm an environmental psychologist, then that's the end of the story. So it's doing environmental psychology, I guess, behind the arras.
Yeah, framing it differently.
That's right.
Rebecca, did you have another question?
Yeah, sorry, I'm mindful that it's 1 o'clock, but I just wanted to also respond to Rob's question. So I'm a practicing architect, but at the moment I do research predominantly in healthcare spaces. So I'm coming at it, I guess, from a slightly different take, which is that a lot of what we see in the research we do, which is a lot of post-occupancy stuff, and not directly, but working in buildings, is that architects a lot of the time are pretty good. Like, they understand the kind of spaces you need to create for people to have intimate conversations and for other things to happen, and how to design affordances into environments. What they're not very good at is kind of advocating for how good they are at it, right? So that's why we get this thing where everyone's like, well, you need the evidence. I'm like, do you really? I mean, could we just get people to trust their architects a little bit more? Because a lot of this stuff is already really good. So I think there's some interesting work to be done in that space.
Sure.
Thanks, Rebecca. Are there any other questions or comments? It's such a shame to have to shut this conversation down, but people have to run to other meetings. So we'll just like to thank you very much, Rob, for giving up your time and sharing. I loved all your little stories, sharing your stories with us. And I look forward to next time. I'm not sure who our speaker will be next time yet, but hopefully we'll see you all in a month. Thanks for coming. Okay.
Thank
Bye.
you.